I'd like to welcome the panel. We're going to start with Joseph Jacks, JJ. So JJ is the founder and general partner of OSS Capital. And since 2018, JJ has directed more than 40 rounds of inception and seed stage investments, representing over 200 million in funding. JJ is also co-founder of Latent Holdings, the leading bit tensor lab, stewarding most of open source toolchain. Welcome, JJ. All right. Next, we have Noah Smith. Noah is a researcher in natural language processing and machine learning, serving as the Amazon professor at the University of Washington and the senior director of NLP research at the Allen Institute for AI. He co-directs the OLMO Open Language Model Initiative and is the principal investigator of the NSF and NVIDIA supported project, Open Multimodal AI Infrastructure for Accelerated Science. Welcome, Noah. All right, and last but definitely not least, we have Bryan Catanzaro. Bryan is the vice president of applied deep learning research at NVIDIA, where he works on Nemotron and DLSS. He joined NVIDIA in 2008, where he wrote the first prototype for cuDNN, one of our most important libraries. I'm going to add that extra. He's a strong advocate for open source AI, where open source means not just a pile of weights, but opening all the data and techniques that are necessary to create AI. Welcome, Bryan. All right, so just to get a feel for who's here, how many of you use open source today? Cool. That's great, awesome. Okay, and how many of you are using large language models? Awesome. Okay, so when see, I was gonna set some ground rules, but this might be, or set some definition. If I was to ask the question of open source and AI, how many can easily say, oh yeah, I know exactly what open source and AI means? Yeah, okay, I was hoping a lot less hands go up. So so that's gonna be our first thing here. So, because it's unclear, right? Like software has changed. When we open source, in traditional software, you figure out the algorithm, you figure out how to solve it, you write the source code, and then you have the binary and you have the open source, and you have the source code, and so you open the source code, simple. But with AI software, things are different, right? You have the algorithms are written differently. You have the architecture of the model, then you have the data set that is used to train the model. You have, and the trained results in trained weights, and there's definitely different stages of these weights. There are techniques like how do you actually train it, how do you fine tune it? So there's many more components to this technology, to this algorithm. So when it comes to open source and open models or open weights, all these different terms that get used, it can mean many different things to many people, right? So that's gonna be my first question is, to the panel here is, what does openness mean in the context of AI? I'm gonna look at you, Noah, to kick us off here.
Of course, make the professor give the definition. So yeah, I think open is a word that gets used a lot. It has, there's obviously a very wide range of attributes that can be open, right? So there's the model weights for the final artifact that's been trained. There's all the iterations that the model went through along the way. There's the data that was used at every one of those steps. There's the code that you need to reproduce that training. If you have the data and the code, maybe you can, and access to hardware, you can maybe reproduce the training. And there's of course the code that you need to run inference with the model at the end of the day. And so I think there's different levels of openness in terms of which of these things are being shared when we share a model.
And so in your view, to be considered open source AI, how much of it needs to be open?
Well, I don't want to take a strong normative position here. Our models are fully open. You can reproduce everything. The data is shared. That's unusual. Very few players are doing that. We'll probably get into some of the reasons why I think it's valuable to have some people doing that. But from a scientific perspective, if you're building a model, the more open you are, the more I'm a fan. And so I think there are reasons not to share everything all the time. And I think there are perfectly good reasons why some data should not be shared, and maybe models can be trained on that data. But I think it's a matter of it's a nuanced matter of what you're going to use the model for and who's going to use it. I think there are a lot of advantages to opting in for using fully open models in some cases.
Thoughts? Is that like?
Well, I would say open source, like, developed in a particular way with a particular technology, and it's been really, really important. AI is a little different. It's a different kind of technology. It's software that's written in a different way. And so I think what Noah said makes a lot of sense, that there's a lot of different kinds of openness. I just prefer to not use the words open source, because I'm trying to differentiate a little bit between openly developed AI and open source software, because I think those kind of have different, there's different implications about that. There's a lot of different, like Noah's saying, a lot of different dimensions that AI can be developed openly. And it's probably going to be okay for different organizations to participate in an open ecosystem for AI in different ways. But I also agree with Noah. I'm a big fan of the work that the AI2 Institute has been doing, and others that have been really committed to openly developing AI, because I think that if people are going to need to integrate AI into their most important business problems, they're going to need to trust it. In order to trust it, they're going to need to understand how it was built, and they're going to need to customize it and integrate it very tightly into their work. And there's so many barriers to all of that if you don't really understand how a model was built and you don't have access to change it or to integrate it. I feel like it's really important that we support open development of AI, and it's something that NVIDIA is really interested in doing. I lead our Nemotron effort, which is our AI technology that we're putting out in the open, and it does include weights, but it also includes pre-training data and all of the techniques that go into it. And I'm really excited that we have the chance to contribute that to the community, and also to learn from the community to try to make AI stronger.
Yeah, I think Olmo and Nemotron are probably two of the most open models that are out there, right? Although I'm going to push us a little bit the other way, is I think you can get a lot done without having it be completely open, right? I mean, JJ, you've got many startups that you work with, and they've been able to be productive without having the weights, without necessarily having, without having the data set, right? You have the weights pre-trained, you can build on top of it.
Well, I guess first I would really agree with everything Bryan and Noah said. I don't think I have much to add in terms of like qualifying what does it mean to be open versus not. I also agree that there's cases where you may not necessarily want to open some training data for whether it's privacy or regulatory reasons, and you can certainly train AI models on that data and build really useful applications. But yeah, I mean, I think to your question, the startup ecosystem of sort of, every startup is now calling themselves an AI startup, right? Because it's hard to raise money kind of otherwise. But I think to your point, Ankit, most of these startups are not releasing models that are sort of similar to Nemotron or to Noah's lab. Instead, they're building application-specific implementations of AI using open models, but they're sort of like fine-tuning those models. So whether it's maybe Nemotron or DeepSeek or other open, depending on how open you want to be, models. And those startups are really successful because they can kind of specialize and point those fine-tuned proprietary AI applications in specific domains. We have plenty of portfolio companies doing this, but I'm like a seed stage investor, so my companies are like less widely known. But like I think if you've heard of companies like Figure or Harvey in like the legal domain, these are like much larger, $10, $20 billion startups. And what they've done is they've taken these AI models that are widely available and open, and they've built very specific, industry-specific applications that are more proprietary. And actually, the business models, I think you were really asking this, but the business models they kind of look similar to conventional SaaS because the customers are sort of paying for accessing the AI for for whatever specific industry application it happens to be, whether it's like per document reviewed or per task completed by a robot or something. So I think the business models will probably look kind of similar too.
Yeah, so the open source helps them jump in and get these things going. They have their cost of entry is
huge amount of leverage and efficiency in terms of just the R&D because they didn't have to build the pre-trained models. That actually is quite similar to kind of how open source gave a lot of software companies, like in the pre-AI era, I guess, like a few years ago, a lot of leverage. Like you look at Linux or MySQL or PHP and these kind of open source projects, they gave, and we still obviously see that because open source continues to be hugely successful and important. But yeah.
Yeah, so a couple of things. I'm gonna come back to that Linux thing because that's a good point. So you're saying openness helps them jump in, but there is a threshold of openness where it's useful and I can use it, but at a certain point, if it's not fine-tunable, if it's not customizable to my use case, then even if it's open, it's not open enough.
Totally. Yeah, there's a lot of open weight models or openly developed models. I like this term Bryan's mentioning, where you sort of have like an openly developed kind of set of workflows and approaches that increase the level of openness across all the different dimensions of how you would build models. But some of the models, like a very large lab recently released, I won't mention their names, but they released an open weights model. But it is difficult to fine tune, and I think the industry kind of is able to discern that and quickly adopt the models that are more easily fine tunable and customizable.
So how many of you remember Linux and PHP and MySQL and Nginx and all that stuff, all that open infrastructure? So you brought it up, so I'm gonna lean a little bit into it. But that was the foundation, the open source foundation of the internet era, right? So that's what a whole lot of these applications, Airbnb, Facebook, all these things were built on that open American stack. Actually, that's kind of true, is that it was open source, it was American, and that was what everything, so much of that technology was built on, right? That's what you're...
Yeah, I mean, I would actually, okay, so I think you were saying, how do we be a little, not combative, but like a little bouncy on the podcast, on the panel. Interestingly, the technologies that you mentioned were actually not built by Americans. So Linux was built by Linus Torvalds, who's actually a Finnish individual. PHP was built by Israeli group, and MySQL was also Scandinavia originated, but very much U.S. in terms of like the adoption contribution. Mm-hmm. I think you could also arguably say those projects probably wouldn't have succeeded without the adoption by American industry
and contributors, right?
Yes. Huge amount of open source contribution here in the United States. Obviously, like NVIDIA is a huge open source contributor, but for many years, I think Intel was the top contributor to the Linux kernel, and really significant.
One of the ideas I think that motivates my love for openly developed AI is that no one institution could ever have all the good ideas, right? And in a world where AI is going to be changing the way that we do everything, we're going to need to be pretty diverse in the way we think about and the way we use AI. And openly developed AI is going to help that.
I totally agree. Yeah, I don't think there's any single company that has a monopoly on the best ideas or the smartest, most capable people. So, yeah.
Well, just like what you were saying before, with all these great people from around the world that helped come together to create the internet.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to shift us a little bit. And so, how many of you saw the keynote? A lot of people saw the keynote. Jensen mentioned this in the keynote, how when you think of AI, a lot of the mental model is an AI chatbot. ChatGPT is AI. True, but AI is more than that. Jensen spoke a little bit about that in his keynote, but since we're talking about open source and open source AI, maybe I can ask Bryan to talk a little bit more about the applications. So Bryan also is applied research at NVIDIA. So the applications of AI in a non sort of chatbot kind of space.
Yeah, well, I mean, basically everything that humans do is going to be done better with AI. And it already is starting, right? Like, I'm sure most of us are using AI on a regular basis to do our own work. But if you think about the 8-9 billion humans on the planet and what they're doing every day, most of them are not typing in text boxes and waiting for an answer to come back, right? So if we think about AI that's actually going to transform the way that we do our work, that's going to make us more productive in all the different things that humans do, then it's pretty obvious that it can't be just a chatbot. Now, of course, chatbots are really amazing, right? And that's the first, ChatGPT. Obviously, it showed the world a new form of AI that people hadn't seen before. That it really changed the way that they thought about what a computer could do. But for AI to actually be successful, it needs to be tightly integrated into the beating heart of every business around the world. The decision making, the logistics, making the people more effective at what they do, taking away burdensome tasks that we all hate. I always remind people that the Dilbert comic exists because people have to do a lot of stuff that's boring, and AI should do that stuff, right? I think we're still at the beginning. The adoption of AI into the business processes of all the different kinds of businesses around the world is going to take time, and it's going to look different. So the way that retail adopted the internet is different than the way that healthcare adopted the internet. They both needed the internet. Both have been completely transformed in the way that they provide services thanks to the internet. But they were able to adapt the internet as an infrastructure to the needs that they faced because the internet was open, because it was everybody could sort of bring their own position, their own platform, their own problems to this technology, and then build something that helped them be more effective. So that's the kinds of applications that I'm really excited about with AI, and I think we are just getting started.
Are there things specifically at the Allen Institute that you want to talk about that you're working on with, like applying the OMO model and things like that?
Well, I can call out one specific case. We are part of a sort of consortium called the Cancer AI Alliance. We're the AI partner, and one of the challenges of applying AI methods in cancer research is that each of the elite cancer research organizations that are partners in this consortium, they must keep their data private. They cannot share data with each other. They cannot share data with us. The lengths we have to go to make sure the data is kept private are easy to understand, right?
Yeah.
But if you can access all the data in some way, or you can access models trained on all the data together, then you can maybe make more powerful generalizations and do things that you couldn't have done within just the boundaries of one of these organizations. So we've been applying a method we call FlexOMO. It's a variant on a mixture of experts architecture where branches of experts, copies of experts are trained locally on local data, and you can optionally share the experts without sharing the data. So
Sounds like federated learning.
It's related to federated learning, but it has some key technical advantages over federated learning that are in the paper. I won't go into it. Okay. But we're very excited about sort of the enabling developers of many kinds to customize models on their own data and control the level to which that's shared with others. And I think that the cancer example is very easy to understand, and there's many shades of that kind of need for different levels of sharing and openness and collaboration across boundaries in every sector, I think.
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember that AI can only be useful if it's given the right information. Right? Intelligence, generally, it's a tool that we use to understand the world and then to act. But the specifics actually matter a lot. And the specifics are always going to be the most tightly guarded data that we have. The more useful the data is, the harder it's going to be to give away to somebody else. And of course, I think about my own personal life. My text messages are pretty valuable to me. I think if somebody posted them all on the internet, somebody could probably make money off of it somehow, But that would be terrible for me, right? Like I don't want AI actually using my text messages against me, but I kind of want to be able to have an AI that uses my text messages for me, right?
But just for you.
Just for me. So that's the issue. So how do we get to AI that can be built that way?
Yeah, one of the companies I work with is they're called Liquid AI, and they're building these on-device models, and there's like all these interesting kind of transformer alternatives. Some of them also use transformers. I think Jensen mentioned there's like a variety of architectures kind of.
Oh yeah, transformers, there's diffusion, there's state space, there's lots of different.
Absolutely, and some of these architectures are actually extremely compute efficient at running on very small power constrained devices like smartphones and laptops. And so, yeah, I think hopefully in the future we'll be able to do that, train AIs on our very personal information without worrying about privacy implications.
So open innovation is the foundation of progress, right? That's kind of something that we say open innovation helps us accelerate, helps us go faster. And so one of the things, we have this collaboration with the Allen Institute, the NSF, and NVIDIA to kind of work together. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that means? And you're one of the principals on it. So
yeah, I can share the story a bit. So our team, was frustrated in early 2023 when ChatGPT had come out. It was quite clearly a big deal. We're a team of scientists and engineers, and my team wanted to know how this stuff worked. And for the first time, the makers of this revolutionary system were not really sharing much information about what went into building it. And so, if you can't reproduce it, it's not science anymore. And so we set out to build our own models fully openly, and we committed to sharing everything to accelerate research across the whole scientific community. And Jensen said yesterday, AI isn't tools, AI is work. And if AI is work, then fully open models are like friendly workers, right? Friendly people who learn from you and who you can learn from, and who what they had for lunch, what's going on with them, right? They're better coworkers. So we started this project, and as we got going, by the middle of 2023, we realized that we were onto something really we felt really important. And it happened that at that time, the National Science Foundation had a call out for a program called Mid-Scale Research Infrastructure. Normally, this program funds things like telescopes, okay, that are considered national research infrastructure to support scientific work. And so we made the case, actually, an anonymous friend gave us this quote that trying to study the state of artificial intelligence scientifically from proprietary models is like trying to do astronomy from pictures of the sky printed in the newspaper. You can't do it, right? So we made the case that fully open AI models, and by this I mean multimodal language models, we're leaving open what the other modalities are, but definitely things like computer vision and so on, right? We made the case that these are necessary infrastructure for the scientific advancement of the United States, not just for AI research, but because scientists themselves are going to be using these models in their work for scientific work. And the key point, data point I like to point to is if you train the models on scientific literature, and they're multimodal in the sense that they can incorporate data from your scientific discipline, then you now have a powerful tool that can link the data that you're working with the literature, which is the other overwhelming part of doing science these days, is the amount of content there is to consume. And so this model is now your partner in understanding what people have done before and your data. So we made this argument, and long story short, it was recommended for funding. The funding came through in August. And the delightful part of this is that the NSF's support of this was matched by NVIDIA. So it's $75 million from the NSF, 77 from NVIDIA, who came in late in the game, making it a public-private partnership. And so we're extremely excited to do this work together with support from our nation's most important scientific funding organization and NVIDIA as well.
So this was the setup for the real question, which is how does private-public partnerships help with innovation and help with American leadership?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, if you're going to train these models, you need GPUs. And so that partnership is getting us access to significantly more compute. I'm really proud of what our team does. We build models that are competitive with the very best models in the world, and we do it with an order of magnitude less people and probably 2 orders of magnitude less compute. So this is going to be a real game changer for us.
Yeah, it was. Well, I'll leave it to you guys, but I was going to make a comment here. I think part of the thing is that the amount of investment, like this is unique in America, I think, compared to some of the other countries, where the amount of investment you can make, like your 75 million turned into 150, because of the fact that we had these private-public partnerships. These private-public partnerships help us invest more, help us work together. And it's not just the money, it's actually the fact that Bryan's working with folks at NSF and Allen Institute, sharing knowledge, sharing information. That is quite valuable in the open innovation. I don't know, Bryan, you want to talk about some of the work there? Or?
Yeah, well, I also just wanted to say one of the things that's really great about openness that I think has helped the United States a lot over the years is that it allows different organizations to contribute in different ways based on their own strengths and their own priorities. It turns out that all of us get up in the morning for one reason or another, and they're different. They're different reasons. One of the challenges if you don't have openly developed technology is that when different institutions have different reasons for doing their work, the puzzle pieces don't really fit together. You end up with something that's less than the sum of its parts because there's a lot of duplication, a lot of waste, and not a lot of learning, right? It kind of slows things back. So, one of the things that we've definitely seen over the past few years in AI and the development of AI is that openness has really moved the field along. I think Meta should get a huge amount of credit for the Llama project. It was brave of them at the time. It's hard to remember, but back then, a lot of people felt like it was dangerous to allow weights of a powerful model to be posted online. And I think Meta was brave enough to start that Llama project, and that garnered a lot of attention from the community. These days, there's a lot of other institutions. For example, OpenAI released GPT OSS, which has been a really fantastic addition to the ecosystem. And of course, what we're seeing out of labs like Alibaba's QWen project or the DeepSeek project. This week, Minimax released a good model. The thing is, if you list all of those institutions and the reasons why they get up to go to work in the morning, they might be quite different. But sharing information and technology has allowed each of them to make progress, I think, at a rate that is better than what they could have done on their own. And specifically, when we think about the history of technology development here in the United States, open technologies have been really, really important. Look at the internet, for example. How much value has been created by that open technology, as opposed to a model. It's hard to remember, but some of you might remember back in the 80s when there was all sorts of various closed internets like Prodigy and CompuServe, and it wasn't that people didn't try to make the closed internet happen. They did. They made like 10 of them. They made 10 closed internets, and that didn't really help the field develop. When we transitioned into a model where we could share information, share technology, and then customize it in different ways, it allowed institutions with different resources, different priorities, to contribute in a way that made sense to them, and then we could build something together that was really, really important. So that's kind of the one of the benefits of open. I guess maybe I should say it in a slightly more pointed way, is that openness, it's not just a nice word. It's not just a thing that feels good, because who doesn't like open things, right? Open things feel better than closed things. So it's not just that. It's actually that there is this huge benefit to allowing institutions with different goals to work together. That's the thing that makes me excited about openly developed AI, because I believe AI is so important, it's going to impact every business in every segment of the economy. Their motivations are going to be all different. The work they're trying to do is going to be all different. But if we can't figure out how to pool what we can together and let people contribute in a way that makes sense to them, the field is going to be held back. So I think now is a really essential moment in the history of the development of AI for us to lean into openness.
I totally agree with that. I've been inhaling a lot of talks by Richard Sutton lately, who's a really incredible AI researcher, father of reinforcement learning. And to steal a quote that I just kind of was reminded of when Bryan was talking, is that without decentralized cooperation, humanity cannot make progress. And open source, the open internet, things like capitalism have kind of caused us to collaborate better. I think in the age of AI, we're clearly seeing a pretty heavy trend in the other direction, where there's a very profit maximizing sort of like, revenue, market cap maximizing trend. I think NVIDIA has actually been probably one of the most promotive and collaborative companies to actually contribute back and be very active in open source, even though the market cap story is pretty obvious. But I do think in the age of AI, we probably need new ways of creating incentives for everyone to kind of cooperate in a decentralized way. And I think that's going to be a pretty big topic in the future.
If you guys want to line up, I have one more question, because we can't talk about open and open source without talking about some risks. And so always comes up, hey, if you're too open, there's risks and dangers to it. So I just wanted you guys to share your perspective on the risks. Anyone can take this one. Share your perspective on the risks, the dangers that people kind of worry about with open source. Because there's always malicious actors that are going to, we make it open, then anyone can use it, including malicious actors. Thoughts?
So I don't think those risks are generally specific to open models.
Sure.
And I think, if you're developing openly, to use Bryan's great phrase, then you're including way more people who can focus their efforts on solutions to those vulnerabilities and problems and risks. And there is a thriving research in improving the usability, the safety, the appropriateness of what AI systems do. And if that's closed, you're trusting a small set of organizations to do it right. More as someone else said, more organizations being involved, more people being involved means you get better ideas.
And Bryan was talking. You were talking about that earlier in the hallway. Your very soundbite thing that you said earlier. Do you remember exactly?
Did I steal your soundbite?
He's had a soundbite. You had a great soundbite.
I wasn't.
Well, I think one of the big dangers of closed systems is about control, and I think Noah just mentioned that, right? But we know that very powerful things that are controlled by a very few people are inherently dangerous.
That's the sound.
And I believe that it is safer, especially with AI. AI is not just an abstract technology; it's a technology that's about ideas. We have a tradition of freedom of speech because it turns out that it is safer for us to have diversity of opinions and open marketplace of ideas. That is safer for our society than a closed marketplace where a few people get to decide what ideas are spoken. And since AI is a technology about ideas, I think that inherently it is safer when it is open than when it is closed.
That's it.
Yeah. Sure, yes. My name is Eric Nothman. I'm with the World Bank. And my question is, it seems as if this is a public good, that you're talking about the internet, as a public good, and also AI potentially as a public good, to be exercised and grown as a public good. And yet there are public goods out there that really could be addressed by the use of AI, and I don't hear very much talk about it, whereas it could come out of the open systems, open, develop, whatever one would like to call it. But if you think about the work that's being done on the planet today, I would say that maybe 25% of the work that could be done is being done. 75% of the work that should be done today is not being done. If you take a look at healthcare, you look at education, better healthcare, better education, tremendous public goods, could be for developing world as an example. It could be within income stratified countries, those that are least able to afford. In any case, AI provides the opportunity at a very small marginal cost potentially to provide tremendous service. And yet the focus and attention all about AI is all, as you said, profit oriented, or a lot of the closed systems are profit oriented. Isn't there room, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about this, to enlarge this sense of AI to include these global public goods that are not being addressed, have never been addressed, tremendous latent demand, if you will, and by the way, huge opportunities to generate jobs.
Yes.
As opposed to losing jobs. And Jensen Huang said something along these lines, saying, well, we don't have enough workers. Well, that must imply we must have a lot of work to do that hasn't been done. So I'm just, what are your thoughts on this? I haven't heard discussions in this area, and forgive me if it's not exactly the right forum, but it seems like it's the only forum within which to discuss these global public goods along the lines of AI being a global public good.
Yeah.
Yes, so this is essentially the argument. Thank you, I really like these examples.
Great.
This is exactly the argument we made for scientific advancement, that investment in science is a public good, it benefits everybody, and there's not really a profit motive for long-term investments in science. And I think you could say the same about the areas you mentioned, health and education, and probably many more. And so I would say, having open models that individuals who want to take these things on, suddenly a huge amount of the effort and cost of getting started applying AI in these important areas is gone because they can start from the work that our team already did. And so they're much closer to that goal if there's a spark to light that fire. I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I think there's use cases of companies, startups building education-oriented, nonprofit type things, using open models in places, in third world countries, in places where education is difficult or access. Because the mobile and phones have been quite broadly distributed now, and so getting access to a personal tutor or teacher kind of capability using open models or infrastructure, that kind of stuff is happening as a public good.
There's maybe one additional piece that we need for that to work, which is that we need very broad AI literacy so that people who are in these communities who have the idea, hey, maybe AI can help with this problem that we're facing, and there's no profit to be made from it, it's just a public good, they know what to do and they know how to use the tools appropriately, because there's a lot of AI out there. Right. There's a lot of different choices, it's complicated, and you want people to pick up the right tool for the job.
I would argue the incentive for looking at the 75% of work that hasn't been really exploited doesn't exist. And what I mean by that is like the bottom 25% sort of making progress on, because the incentives exist. They exist today in terms of Western free market capitalism. And I think it's a really great question about sort of like 75% that will need sort of like humanity scale effort, and probably billions of jobs that currently don't exist. We need a different type of incentive structure. And as a VC, doing that for about 10 years, invested hundreds of millions of dollars. Western innovation has really been a function of free market capitalism, subsidies at the earliest stages. I think NVIDIA raised about, actually I was reading the S1 on the way here on the plane yesterday, it was about 20 million before going public in 99. So Jensen's going and raising money from Sequoia and so on. Venture capital is really a kind of an incentive mechanism for innovation. Many companies bootstrap, they don't raise venture capital, which is also great, but they have the incentive to capture profits, to your point. And so I think in this world of like changing economic paradigms, I guess, we really need a totally different way of thinking about the incentive systems for people to actually contribute. BitTensor is something I'm a big fan of. I think there's a lot of other interesting experiments around this. If you look at Bitcoin doesn't have an incentive for creating the network. You solve a cryptographic hash, and it produces a really secure database for representing value, but there's no profit mechanism there. Deflationary, scarce assets seem to have something that work pretty well in comparison to highly inflationary, non-scarce assets, like, for example, equities and fiat currencies. I'm not like a crypto maximalist or anything, but that's kind of how I think about it a little bit. But yeah, I think it's a great question. Oh, crap.
Thank you. I just encourage everybody to be thinking about this, because it is it's a new revolution. If it's at the level of an industrial revolution, history that's happened, well, then it may need some new paradigms and some new thinking in order to take the tremendous value, and instead of having it accrue to the few, to have it accrue to the many. And I'm not talking about in terms of, violence and fights and, this people against those people. No, this is a technology, and maybe the technologists might be the right people to sort of sort out how can we build the incentives that are in the right place in order to do what everybody knows should be done, which is let's take care of everyone with the value that AI produces.
So Eric, yeah, so I'm being told we're out of time. I'm really sorry. I'll give you a hat. Thanks. And the gear store is open if anybody wants to buy a hat. And Eric, why don't I give you this one? Thank you for the question.